Compliance is huge. It's king and queen. That is the type of thing that can cripple a company. That is the type of thing that can really wreak havoc within a company. And to be compliant is so important.
You kind of built a career out of helping DMEs clean up their revenue cycle, accelerate cash flow. What's one of the biggest misconceptions people have about RCM in this space?
A lot of them have not paid enough attention to it. They establish certain protocols. They put possibly one or two people in charge of it and have not evolved over time. There's so many changes and so many variables that they have not kept up with the times.
Metrics and KPIs are a huge part of your playbook and probably tie into the scenario you just explained to me. Which ones matter the most to DMEs?
We can get a 12-year-old kid to hit the invoice button. That's very easy. At the end of the day, it's about collections. It's the clean paperwork up front.
If you could wave a magic wand and fix one systemic issue in DME operations, what would it be?
There's a big disconnect between the doctors who are actually prescribing the device and the patient actually getting the device and using it the proper way.
All right, we are back and live on the #1 DME podcast in the country, claim to fame. Today we have a special guest, Keith Steichen from Royal Apex Solutions. Welcome to the show, Keith.
Oh, very good. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Welcome, Keith. Appreciate the time today, sir.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, Keith, usually we kind of start off the show with giving you a chance to kind of explain a little bit about who you are, introduce yourself, and a little bit about your company.
Sure. Yeah, I have Royal Apex Solutions, which is a DME consulting company. So I have the ability to go into DME companies. And one of the areas that a lot of founders, a lot of the CEOs, a lot of the presidents of these organizations, they understand sales, they understand marketing, yet they don't understand the reimbursement process all that well. So I can come in, help aid them with that. Typically, they've seen decreased reimbursements as far as what's been coming in. And I can help them look at all their processes, look at what they're doing right, affirm that, and then also things that they can improve upon, and then hopefully, ideally, put more money in to their bottom line. So that's just a little snapshot there.
Amazing. Keith, you've been doing this for 25 years in the DME space, so I'm sure you've seen the industry evolve through every major payer change, compliance challenge, market shift. What keeps you passionate about it for so long?
Well, I think a little bit about what you said there, Wayne, from the standpoint that it's always evolving. It's not a stagnant industry by any means. I look at all the changes that have occurred, and you really have to be adaptable. You have to be able to put your thinking hat on every day. You have to deal with people in a real positive way. And so I love that aspect of it. And I love the challenge of that. And there's so many variables when you look at it that, it's really a great industry to be part of. At the end of the day, we know that the patient's quality of life improves. And to be part of that whole process is very fulfilling.
That's great.
Absolutely.
You kind of built a career out of helping DMEs clean up their revenue cycle, accelerate cash flow. What's one of the biggest misconceptions people have about RCM in this space?
Yeah, I think a lot of them have not paid enough attention to it. I think that they've, whenever they began the business, that they established certain protocols, they put possibly one or two people in charge of it and have not evolved over time. So kind of what we were talking about earlier, there's so many changes and so many variables that they have not kept up with the times. And their only litmus test typically is seeing reimbursements go down. And then by then it's too late. So again, I would say that is probably a big reason why they give a person like myself a call.
And Keith, I got a question for you when it relates to kind of RCM and whatnot. There's obviously a lot of DME companies that keep it in-house. There's a lot that like to, use a third party. What do you kind of recommend to DMEs, and is that a case-by-case basis? And how does that look?
Yeah. Good question. First of all, I think it's kind of a case-by-case basis. The reason I say that is a small startup that's strapped for funds will possibly not have the opportunity to go full bore billing operations. So that being said, that may be an opportunity for them to farm out their billing. However, as a company grows and matures, I think there's a great opportunity to establish that, and a few reasons. First of all, the margins are better, obviously. When you look at the cost of people within DME, as far as the billing aspect, these people, there's a great return on investment. There truly is. So you get to that return on investment rather than farming it out to somebody else. And then also, when you speak with most DME owners, presidents, that type of thing, leadership, they're typically, most of them are looking for an exit plan. And to have that building up operations under your umbrella as an organization is really powerful. Because if you think about the traditional, most DMEs, most of them do not manufacture their own product. Most of them have 1099s distributors, and they don't have their own billing opportunities. So when you do go to have that exit strategy and have that final big sale or whatever, what is the other company really buying? Okay, they're really buying. They're buying a product that other people can get access to. They are also looking at 1099s. There's nothing against 1099s, but a lot of times they'll go to the competition for 1% more or whatever. And then if you own that billing operation, that's a tangible asset that you have. I'll elaborate on that a little bit. I've had the opportunity to work with two of the largest private equity companies in the past. And they've all said this verbatim. Both of them have said this at different times, that, you know what, every company has finance, every company has HR, every company has engineering, so on and so forth. But the thing that makes these businesses so attractive is the reimbursement and the billing operations around it. Because one, it's a moat to other people entering that, but then also that's the type of thing that's very tangible, that you're allowed to get larger multiples at an exit event.
Keith, what are the most common issues you see holding these companies back from maximizing the billing and collections?
Well, I think there's generally a lack of accountability. When I have went into organizations, it's very ironic. They will say, I'll say, kind of give me the lay of the land. What's happening with your organization on the billing side. And invariably they'll say, boy, this person over here, for this example, Susie, she's awesome. She's got it down and is doing really well. What happens is typically that person, whoever that person may be, Susie in this example, they may have been good 5 years ago. They may have been good 10 years ago. However, as we're talking about the change and the dynamic part of DME, they have not kept up with the times. And then typically that person is pretty smart, where they will keep all the good territories and they'll farm out the worst territories to the newbies. So guess what? That person then stays at a very high plateau. But as you dig in, and this has happened numerous times, when you dig into what they're really doing, they're not providing all that much, positivity to the organization. So looking at that and then just doing a true honest evaluation, and then also putting in metrics and standards. I've seen that those things have been lacking in a lot of organizations.
Along those same lines, Keith, metrics and KPIs are a huge part of your playbook and probably tie into the scenario you just explained to me. Which ones matter the most to DMEs?
Well, the running joke I've said for years is that, hey, we can get a 12-year-old kid to hit the invoice button. That's very easy. Just invoice. At the end of the day, it's about collections, okay? And as a result, it's the clean paperwork up front. It's working with the sales organization to try to maximize the paperwork, the quality paperwork, and then ultimately billing it with the clean paperwork that you need, and then ultimately collecting. And again, what you're ideally looking for in this type of situation is your first pass yield. And again, that first pass yield is so important because it takes time, money, and energy to go after second, third time and things like that. So, yeah.
Thank you. There's some really good insights.
Mm-hmm. And you've kind of built AR and collections teams for everyone from startups to enterprise level DMEs. How do you sort of like scale process without losing that personal accountability you were kind of talking about?
Yeah, I think part of it is getting to know the organization, getting to know the people. One of the things that I believe that a lot of companies or managers miss out on is that they're disconnected from the actual people they're dealing with. So getting to know them and trying to find out what are their true strengths and weaknesses, find out what handicaps they may have within the organization as well, from the standpoint, is there a systems issue? Is there a processing issue? Is there a, are there, what could be basically getting in the way? And a lot of times these people who are in the reimbursement area, they don't have a true advocate a lot of times, or they do have an immediate manager, but that immediate manager doesn't have access to the executive team. So I think, first of all, analyzing them, getting to know them, and then also finding out, okay, what are their pain points? What do they need to do to be better and to collect more? So those would be a couple things that I would think of.
Awesome. And I think Alex mentioned earlier, but you've worked with a lot of PE-backed groups. What's different about helping those groups versus, a founder-led one or a startup maybe?
Yeah, good question. So most of these PE groups, they have a very strict timeline on when they obviously put out the initial allocation of money to purchase the company. And then they have a strict timeline of when they want to get their return on investment. Mm-hmm. And again, it's generally a short time, I would say 3 to 5 years typically. And they will do almost anything to make that goal come across, whether it be getting high-level consultants to come in to figure out the business, whatever it will take to do that. So it's just, which can be a big differentiator compared to the initial founder who started the company in his basement, for instance. And then, it's kind of this folksy, homegrown type business. We've kind of grown organically. Well, now you're playing with the big boys in PE, and those cultures may not work altogether all that well. It can, but there needs to be a lot of dialogue occurring there and a lot of culture sharing as well.
Totally.
What's your take on the lay of the land of PE and DME these days from your lens?
Well, again, typically PE works very well for the top people at the executives. It works really well for them typically. And, so I think it's definitely a vehicle where the owner or the upper executives can have a cash out event, so to speak. But, I think what gets missed in the translation is some of those people who have worked extremely hard to help build that company. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes they get forgotten.
Keith, I kind of want to move to compliance and payer development. You've kind of handled everything from workers' comp to VA, Medicare. Which payer type is the most complex right now, in your opinion?
I think the commercial insurance actually is. And the reason is work comp, for the most part, is pretty cut and dry. Medicare is one payer. So that's, you should be able to get the hang of that. But these commercial payers with all these various plans and trying to understand them all is really troublesome. And for a smaller company who does not have the ability typically to keep up with all of those changes, they can get lost definitely in the weeds in that situation. So my thought would be on the commercial side.
If a DME owner is listening right now and, worried about audits and some of the problems that you help solve, what's your number one piece of advice for them?
I would have my first piece of advice is
Let's say first, maybe not number one. It's probably
a top one. A top one would be know what your staff is doing. Okay, it's not in your SOPs. Okay, standing operating procedures. Those may be crystal clear, but it's what's truly happening. Because what happens is, from a compliance standpoint, if there is ever an audit, that's what I would be concerned about. That's what I would stay awake on. And if you have any inkling that things are being done in a possibly not so forthright manner, I would clean that up immediately.
And how do you sort of approach compliance, especially when you're trying to balance speed and growth and regulation?
Yeah, compliance is huge. In fact, it's king. It's king and queen, as far as I'm concerned. From the standpoint that that is the type of thing that can cripple a company. That is the type of thing that can really wreak havoc within a company. And to be compliant is so important. So if you're at a mid-sized company to a larger company, most likely you'll have a compliance officer. I strongly advocate that the reimbursement team has a very good relationship with that compliance officer who's ever taking that lead, and really have to wrestle through when certain situations come up. But at the end of the day, doing that in tandem with that compliance officer is extremely important.
Keith, you've led teams, I'm sure they definitely had a compliance officer. You led teams of well over 100 people. What is like a leadership philosophy when it comes to building high performance RCM teams?
Well, I think first of all, you have to understand what you're trying to accomplish, and the team needs to understand that as well. I've always been of the mindset that the one thing, I'm a pretty simple guy, and the one thing that you cannot change is a person's past or their character. And it'd be really crazy for a person like myself to come in and think that, the person might have a bad attitude, but because I'm such a wonderful manager and things like that, they're going to change. I haven't seen that. I'm sure there have been some modern day miracles out there, but I haven't experienced that too often. So you give me somebody who has a good to great attitude along with above average smarts, we can roll. You give me somebody who's brilliant with a poor attitude, I'm sorry, we just can't. So I really believe that if we take that attitude with a good attitude, above average smarts, we can really make a difference because we can train on all the details and they can absorb that. And with that can-do attitude, that positive attitude, you can do a lot of great things.
You've mentioned like relationship first consulting. How does that mindset sort of translate into better payer relationships?
Well, the peer relationships obviously are relational. They truly are. And whether you like it or not, people like to do business with people they enjoy. And so that's part of it. And if you're abrasive, if you are a person who is, people can't get along with or for whatever reason, then guess what? Your success rate is probably not going to be that high when you're trying to get contracts. Okay. So that should just be a must have. And then by establishing those good relationships, the key person at the insurance company will also let you know in advance of when things are going to possibly change. Okay. So you gain the benefit not only by gaining a contract, but then also getting the heads up down the road that, hey, there's some certain changes you might want to be prepared for. And then the key is to cultivate that relationship, not just to call them when you need them, but just kind of check in and, get more towards that personal level we were talking about previously.
Keith, talking about changes, we're in an ever changing space that's always throwing different wrenches at us, like the movie Dodgeball. I'm sure you've seen it all over the decades. What's the biggest shift happening right now that leaders should prepare for, or things that you're thinking about with your clients that you consult with?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is that in the back of most owners or most leadership's mind is how long can this continue? Meaning we have a product that we're building, we're doing really well with it, we're starting just to get the inkling of declining reimbursements. So as I look into my crystal ball and I look down the road, how much longer can this conceivably go on? That's a big question that a lot of people have. Thus the need for diversity within your product mix or portfolio mix or whatever. So I think that's kind of how I'd choose to answer that.
We always like to sort of bring up this topic on every podcast because it is interesting and it is like the magic keyword and buzzword always. But how do you see like automation and AI fitting into RCM and compliance over the next, 5-10 years?
Yeah, I mean, it's necessary. It's necessary. It's here. Get on board with it. And the people who are saying, I don't know if it's going to last or it's a trend or a fad, I don't know how dynamic your organization is going to be. So I would be a huge advocate of getting on board with it and then figuring out, okay, are there areas that we can use AI, for instance, to cut things down from a time standpoint, but then where we can reallocate those employees to more profitable ventures. So that's kind of how I would view it and use it. But again, if there's a hesitancy right now, I would say, boy, you're well behind it, and you better start moving.
Yeah, especially with competitive bid on the horizon. If there was
Absolutely.
ever a time to start thinking about your digital transformation.
Exactly.
I did a post the other day. Yesterday was the best day. Today is the second best day to start thinking
Correct.
about that because there's definitely opportunity, when challenges arise. So I think everyone it's on most of our listeners' mind probably, but just to reiterate the fact.
Well, yeah, definitely. And realistically, I mean, I think you can easily make the case in certain situations. You can get 30 to 60% improvement, relatively easy by jumping on board at that. And the other thing you have to remember too is, yes, it'll make our organization better, but guess what? What about the competition? If they've already jumped on it, we're now further behind than we even anticipated. So again, it's really, really important to take advantage of it as soon as possible.
Totally agree with that. Keith, this is my last question before we move on to the rapid fire. If you could wave a magic wand and fix one systemic issue in DME operations, what would it be?
I think there's a big disconnect between the doctors who are actually prescribing the device and the patient actually getting the device and using it the proper way. I think there's a huge disconnect there. I see it all the time where the patient receives it. They're basically giving it to them when they're in the midst, after a surgery here or after a very traumatic event, and they get home, they don't know how to use the device. They don't understand how it's going to benefit their lives. And I think that training has really been missed out on. And as a result, then you have the potential to have that patient go back and have a poorer recovery, and then also go back to the doctor who's the referrer, who's writing the script, and you're actually a referring agent if you really look at it, and give a bad messaging to them, which you truly don't want. So I think if you can shore that up on the front end, I think that's really important. And then obviously, I had mentioned it before, that whole aspect of the clean claim, getting that paperwork in initially, and then everything else generally flows well through the system.
Yeah, one of our episodes was with Mike Austin. He's the founder of Quality DME out of Virginia, and he describes it as the love triangle, basically trying to keep the patients, the payers, and the providers happy, which is the reason why our industry is so difficult, because the payer is not the one paying for it. They're also not really the one technically requesting for you to give it to them. So it really is a balancing act. But going back to your first point, Keith, do you think that's really like a patient education issue from the teams not, I don't say not doing their job, but there's definitely room for improvement when dispensing the product or setting someone up? Or where's the breakdown that,
I think from the standpoint of from when the doctor writes the prescription to all of a sudden there's this black hole. And the organizations that do really, really well have the fitters. They do the patient education extremely well. The ones that just basically either drop ship and have little to no interaction with the patients, they don't do nearly as well. So I think that part is really critical. And again, that's another thing when you talk about AI, that can be taken care of, from the standpoint, if you can have training online, you can, there's a bunch of ways you can figure that out. But a lot of companies, unfortunately, I don't think they do the best. They could definitely improve upon that.
Gotcha. No, really interesting insights.
And who you had talked about before with kind of the, the triangle, I would add a fourth point to that I think often gets neglected. It's actually the sales rep too. From the standpoint, yes, patient, doctor, insurance company, but I'll tell you what, when the reimbursement side does not interact well with the sales rep, chaos ensues. Because what happens then, you go from having supposedly this team approach, you have the sales rep saying, no, you cost me money. You have the internal people saying, no, you didn't provide the proper paperwork. Boom, boom, boom. Next thing you know, you're doing this. And that is not good either. So to me, you've always had to go 4 for 4. Patient, doctor, sales rep, ultimately who's paying for it, the insurance company.
Love Square.
Yeah, I speak with a lot of DMEs where their sales reps and vice versa have very limited visibility between the two parties. So definitely resonate with that.
And if you want to chase your tail as a reimbursement person, start getting into little arguments with the sales. Nobody ever wins in those. Been part of too many, seen too many of those.
Awesome, Keith. Well, that brings us to our favorite part of the session, which is the rapid fire. So it's more of like a this or that, no brain busters. Are you ready?
Sure.
Metric dashboards or gut instinct?
got to go metric dashboards. I would say a combination, but since we got to, it's binary, go metric dashboard.
Payers or patients? Who's harder to please?
Payers.
Audits or acquisitions? What's more stressful?
Oh, audits. Acquisitions are fun, typically.
If you weren't in DME, what industry would you be in?
I would be the type of service that would be helping other people. And, so on the side, well, actually right now, my wife and oldest son, we've started a medical staffing agency. So we're trying to help people find their next job. And that can be nurse practitioners. It can be physician's assistants. It can also be, we're also starting to add an executive part to that as well. So it'd be a type of service that way. I think that's really important. I like the service aspect, and I like the ability to raise people and to really help them. On the side, for instance, I spend quite a bit of time counseling men, and then also my wife and myself counsel married couples. So we get a lot of enjoyment out of that.
Awesome.
Interesting.
Yeah.
If your leadership style were a movie, would it be Moneyball or Remember the Titans?
Or Remember the Titans. Yeah.
Awesome. Last one. If you could describe the DME industry in one word, what would it be?
Dynamic.
Awesome. Crushed it, Keith.
That's fair. Keith, thanks so much for joining today. If anyone wants to contact you or reach out to your company, what's the best way they can find you?
You can go to my website, royalapexsolutions.com, or else to my LinkedIn.
Great. Well, Keith, thanks so much for joining today. We had a great time, and hopefully we can do this again soon.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you so much, both of you.
Appreciate it. Have a good one.